Welcome to the CSS3 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about using the text shadow property in CSS. So CSS text shadow. Text shadow is another CSS property that allows us to do some interesting things with our text elements in CSS. Very similar to the box shadow properties in CSS3, text shadow can be applied to text and receives the same four parameters that we used in the box shadow. Parameters are the X offset, the Y offset, the blur, and then the color of the shadow itself. The text shadow property adds shadow to text. This property accepts a comma-separated list of shadows to be applied to the text as we enter them into our CSS. And browser support across the board, it's supported in Internet Explorer 10.0 and up. Google Chrome is 4.0 and up. Safari is 3.5 and up. Firefox is, Safari is 4.0 and up. Firefox is 3.5 and up. And Opera is 9.6 and up. So let's move into our development environment and demonstrate some of the new features using text shadows in CSS. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize our presentation, get into our development environment. I want to confirm that my Apache server is up and running, which it is. Let's go ahead and close the Apache server. Let's go ahead and bring up Google Chrome, which will be the browser that we use for this demonstration, and Sublime Text 2, which will be my text editor. You'll notice I've got our start file already loaded. I've got the start file loaded inside my browser also for that particular portion. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as, I'm going to call this CSS. Actually, let's just call it 3017 underscore example1 .html. Save the change, go ahead and refresh our browser and go ahead and load up that example1. First thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and put a heading in here. I'm going to go ahead and put an H1 and we'll just say this is text shadow demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and close that H1 and then just come down. I'm going to actually put an H2, which will be the actual text that we're going to shadow. And this is my shadow text. I'll just call it shadow text. And then close that H2 tag. Go ahead and save those changes. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser so we can see our display. And now we see that we have the text shadow demonstration. Too bad I spelled text wrong. Let's go ahead and fix that real quick. Save the change, refresh the browser. And now let's go ahead and address this text shadow demonstration and how we can actually do this inside of CSS. Actually, some pretty cool properties that are available here. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and add some style tags to our head section, as we've been doing for most of our demonstrations. My opening and closing style tags, and I'm just going to come down here and let's go ahead and target that H2. So I'm going to say H2, opening and closing curly braces, and I just want to give it a text shadow, and that with a semicolon. Now we're going to give it our X offset, our Y offset, and our blur, and then the color itself. We've got a white background, so we're going to use a dark gray. So let's go ahead and give it I'm going to give it an offset of 2 and 2, so let's say 2 pixels, 2 pixels. We'll leave the blur off for this particular demonstration. Let's give it a 999 for the color. Give this a nice light gray. Save that change. Refresh our browser window, and you can see now that we've got that nice text shadow that's part of the H2 tag. If I wanted to actually have this for H1 and H2, I could actually put the H1 comma and H2, and then I'd be addressing both those tags. And then I'd have the shadow for both the H1 and the H2. And you know, it's kind of cool that we can actually do this now without a lot of rigmarole. In the old days, we actually would have had to use graphics to do this prior to the changes in CSS3. If I wanted to actually make my text color a different color, I could actually come down here and say, okay, let's make the text color almost like a black. I'm going to go ahead and put 292929. Save the change, refresh the browser window, and you can see now that we've got this really dark text color. And we have this really nice shadow. If I wanted to apply a blur to this, that would be my third setting. I could actually put in a blur. Let's put a 2 pixel blur. Once we refresh the browser window, you'll notice that we're not going to have that sharpness in the shadow itself. The shadow itself will kind of blur. And again, that's what the blur is for. We have our X offset is the first value, the Y offset is the second value, the third value is the blur. And then that fourth value is the color of the actual shadow itself. A whole lot of different things we can do with this. We can increase the offsets if we wanted to. Again, just to give us a little bit more outstanding depth into that actual text itself. We could actually, normally I don't use the blur. We get rid of the blur. And again, that just sharpens up that shadow effect. Although it does, especially as you get more and more depth to it, it does look more realistic with the blur impacted on the actual presentation, because it does make it appear more like it's a real shadow. Because again, the farther away from the text you get in real life, the more blurred that shadow would become if it were truly a shadow being cast from an offset light. Anyway, so I hope that's a good idea of how we use the text shadow in CSS. Hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.